This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are talking about Corona depression.
The stir-crazed writer.
Yes,
the
gosh,
isolation problem.
We're three some odd months into this pandemic, and we thought we would revisit the topic and just talk about coping as artists. And let's see, who wants to start us off? I'm turning it over right away.
That's right.
Hand it off. It's like hot potato.
I had
You.
3 months where I could just be at home every day. Then I'd get the book finished.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
If somebody was interrupting me, I didn't have family or friends to deal with.
Right. I didn't have to run errands. Everything was just delivered to my door, and
Totally.
things were quiet. Yeah. And so many people said that at the beginning. And I think even continue to say that, like, hey, you wanted to not go to work. You wanted spare time. You wanted, and now it's here. So
tragedy aside,
yes.
it's obviously, it's been difficult
Yeah.
to handle that, because even the biggest introverts need some kind of injection of something from outside, and certainly, based on my mother's experience in the UK, she's elderly and doesn't drive anymore and isn't terribly mobile, but she's rattling around her own house, and even though she never went out much, it's enough. It's just that final, nail in the coffin, which is a horrible metaphor for it.
Yes, it is, Robert.
Yeah. Well, but let's be clear about this. I said off air that she said, "What's the point? If this is going to go on for another couple of years, what's the point?" And so we can be very dogged by our external world forcing these states on us, which as a writer can be extraordinarily difficult to deal with. And yet you look at how writers throughout history have responded to that. For some, it's been the intense pressure that's produced their finest work, and for others have floundered and done nothing, because what can you do? How can I possibly create art while people are falling around me, while I'm losing loved ones, or while social media is just one great divisive chasm of civil war. So, certainly if you wanted story material,
right,
it's packed in there.
Right, it is. Well, so have either of you been able to be extra productive due to the enforced isolation? Have you been less productive because of the situation?
I think I've been more. I've noticed that I probably used to use lots of excuse chores and errands. And so I found myself because obviously I work from home anyway on a computer. So in terms of compared to other people's interruptions. So, I feel for those people who have had, say, a small business, a cafe or a restaurant, who have just potentially lost their entire life savings and their means of work for who knows how long. Yeah. So I've been fortunate to continue with little stress around any pivot. It's not been required. We had some issues around paperback sales that took a bit of reconfiguring and working out, and there's some stress there around what was going to happen. We had one of our other businesses is an Airbnb, and we lost about between $20,000 and $25,000 worth of bookings, which was a massive hit on the cash flow. But that's still, we're well. In Australia, we've dodged a big bullet, even though we've got some coming back down south. We haven't had what you guys have had. So I've been able to get on with things. Yes, focus has been a challenge, but in some ways it's driven me to, okay, now I need to really prepare and I want to get some things done that I've been trying to get done. And interestingly, it came at a time where we were making some major life decisions about where we were going to place investments. And all of a sudden the share market's crashing, and luckily we were still in cash. So and we still are. So some of those stress factors are definitely, they occasionally impact on my productivity, where we've had these momentous life decisions to make, and I'm sure that's happened to a lot of people.
Right.
And then I've got work,
right,
where I'm supposed to churn out art,
right,
and so it's required a bit more effort to switch state for me. But I've had more time to do it, and I've had less interruption, and it's made me realise, I've probably been very inefficient in the past, because I've I'll just go to the supermarket because, we need this and we need that, and I'm just going to go out for coffee, or I'm just,
Right.
You don't realise how much time we just fritter. And now that you can't, it's a little stark, and that can be difficult because you're facing that blank page, perhaps. So yeah, it's been a really interesting mix, and luckily haven't suffered from depression from it. But I would say in parts I've been a lot more productive, and in other parts things are just totally on hold. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
right.
I'd say the
Okay, but Laurie.
For me, it's been interesting because, like, writing wise, I have more time, but it feels like I have less mental capacity. And I think that part of that is because of everything that's going on and that I'm dealing with on like a personal and professional level. So I think the isolation is hitting me worse than I thought, and in terms of like just not seeing the people that you want to see. And even if you're talking to them like online or phone calls, it's just not the same,
Right.
So you don't get the same level of conversation. And I knew I wasn't like pure introvert anyway, like let's be real, but but it's like not having that has been an interesting like rebalancing kind of that inputs versus outputs for me. And then like seeing all of my like students, all the kids, they're kind of suffering from like screen, like they just don't even care anymore. They don't want to see anybody
Overload.
online, and it's, so it's a little bit hard to, see the kids losing productivity and stuff like that. But I think the biggest thing for me that I've discovered is that I have been taking in more. So I've been reading a lot more and a lot more widely, rather than necessarily being productive on my writing, because I almost feel like I just need that sensory, like give me something more, like I want more. And it's not so much movies or anything like that. I don't know why, like I can't seem to find anything I want to watch, but I can find a million things I want to read right now. So it's like that escapist social interaction for me where I can feel like I'm having a relationship with the characters and with what's going on in their world and their life, because that's like rebalancing my mental ability right now. So although I haven't been very productive writing wise, I've been productive in other areas of my life because I had to be, right? And then also kind of rebalancing what I'm taking in order to keep myself on that optimistic. I'm a very optimistic person. I don't like to be down. So it's like, I'm just going to find ways to be really happy. And so sitting out on my patio reading books lately has been the way to keep myself kind of balanced. So in taking different forms of media rather than necessarily trying to keep up with what's going on in the world, because that's too hard.
It is too hard.
And ugly as well. And it's interesting what you say that, because that it's been less about external stimulation, such as, say, movies or whatever, but it's been things that have been forcing you inward and creating your own world inside. And I wonder if that is a way that we learn. I mean, that's why stories are so incredibly valuable, because they help us cope in times of great struggle and stress. Even in some of the horrible wartime conditions, you hear tales of people telling stories. What was it? It was a true story about a girl who got liberated from a concentration camp, and the only reason that it happened was because she recited poems late at night to keep everybody. Well, I don't know, to keep them whatever, spirits, obviously.
Right.
So even in the most intense times, we can choose story as either a form of escape or a form of input or whatever. So are you listening to them as well as reading them? You were saying before that
primarily right now I'm reading them.
Okay.
But I think it's like it keeps my mind moving and it keeps me engaged in something. Because I can think about the book as I'm going throughout my day or whatnot, and I look forward to it, and it keeps me moving in that direction rather than getting stuck. So I think, definitely the format of story is a good way to just kind of like continue my forward momentum, for lack of a better, term, mentally. And, so, yeah.
What about you, Alida?
Oh, gosh. I think my productivity has been fairly normal, like overall. It has been fairly normal, but, which isn't to say great, but at least it hasn't completely tanked. There have been really hard weeks, and I think initially the COVID situation hit hard, and then you kind of rebalance and adjust and normalize to what your life is going to look like under that situation. But now I live in South Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed. And so there's been so much unrest here, and things, were really, really bad for a couple of weeks, and they are not good now. So my mind is turning less to COVID and more to what is our future going to look like as humanity, as a country, as a city, there are homeless camps, tent camps popping up in our city parks all over the place and such. And so writing in the morning when my mind is fresh still works. But as the day goes on and more things cross your mind or cross your awareness through the media, or because you happen to go out for groceries and you drive somewhere and you start thinking about what's happening in the world, and it's not just one front now, it's
multiple fronts.
Yeah, multiple major fronts. It is a lot to take in. And I wonder if we as artists, responsibility feels like too heavy-handed a word. Do we have a responsibility to make art around this? I know some people are called to do that, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Others of us need to absorb and digest and process, and maybe it will filter into our art a year from now or 2 years from now, right? So I think we all need to be gentle with ourselves. Not just in terms of, am I writing, am I not writing, but what am I absorbing? How am I living with this? Yeah,
I think that's been my biggest struggle is what am I absorbing and how am I, because it's that anxiety and stress that you can really spike yourself with if you want to right now is so easy. You could just death spiral immediately into what ifs and, like you said, multiple fronts of things that are going on. It's not just how do I stay safe and not get sick anymore. There's a lot more critical components, within society and the economy and, all sorts of stuff. So I think it's that input, like what am I taking into my brain and how is that affecting me? And then, therefore, how is it affecting my art? Which, as artists, I think that there's a form of personal therapy there, right? Even if you're not going to, it's like getting the ability to express yourself, whether that's through music or through painting or through drawing or through, there's all sorts of different artistic endeavors, right? You don't need to limit it to writing. Even as writers, I'm sure most of us have more than one artistic path that we have explored. So it's like allowing yourself to have that output and then controlling what you're allowing in to begin with, so that it doesn't affect you too much on the other side.
Right. And I just want to note too, for everyone listening, that there's a distinction to be made here, as a citizen as a member of my community and of humanity, I can go join a cleanup team. I can make donations.
Right.
I can do activist things, but that doesn't mean that as a writer, I am ready to take this all on and start producing art to bring it out in a form in my writing.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm not a journalist. I'm not an essayist. Like timeliness is not part of my practice as a writer. I'm a novelist, you know? So being super current isn't how I make art. That's not my process. So I don't want anyone to think that if we say, you know, be gentle with yourself, take your time, limit what you take in, it doesn't mean that we're ignoring anything or that we aren't also caring and acting in other ways. We're just speaking as writers. How is this affecting us here? Yeah.
Well, as you say, I mean, it's something that is happening on multiple fronts and nobody's really experienced before. And, you know, we're witnessing leadership, struggle to help us through. So, you know, in many places, society feels like it's crumbling, and that makes it very difficult, I think, to you start to question, well, should I be going about things normally now? Or, you know, so because sitting down and writing your novel that's, you know, set back in the 18th century, it's like, well, that's got nothing to do with what's going on now. Shouldn't I be concerned about that? Well, if you're a novelist and that's what you do, of course you don't have to be concerned about that. What are you writing? And I think you're wise there, Alida, to suggest that these are two separate parts of ourselves, and that you can choose to either mingle them or keep them separate. And you know, that is essentially an artist's choice.
And just because you keep them separate right now doesn't mean that eventually you won't have something to say. Yeah.
Right. Yes. So it's not set in stone, and you know, it's whatever. So I suppose what we're saying is everything and nothing here. It is one of those bizarre eras in life where almost anything is true.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And only time will tell what's going to happen. But you know, with so many conversations happening around race and justice right now, we can't help but have these things permeate our consciousness. And sooner or later, whether we're a writer who wants to be very timely or a writer who needs to, you know, develop that story, let it percolate for years, I think these things will ultimately inform our art because it's our lived experience right now. So how can it not become part of our consciousness and part of what we produce at some point?
Yeah, even if it's not visible on the outside, exactly. Yeah. Right. It's gonna have forged us in some way, presumably. You know, good or bad. So
yes,
that's tough. Did you see? You might have already seen that meme that was floating around. You know, 2020, written by Stephen King, directed by Quentin Tarantino. That's it on a daily basis. Sometimes that's how it can feel. I found myself struggling to keep up with non-fiction. So whenever I've got a choice on my to be read list, I'm going to fiction rather than non-fiction. Yes. Have you found similar things?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether you're avid non-fiction readers anyway, but you know, wouldn't say I'm an avid non-fiction reader, but I read a lot of non-fiction. And fiction is always my first love, but non-fiction right now is just, I can't be bothered with it. It's too real. Yeah. I'm reading, when I read non-fiction, it tends to be for research, not for news of the day or state of the world stuff. So, but my pleasure reading right now, I'm reading Swamplandia by Karen Russell. So that is very escapist. That is a lot of fun. You know, I get news of the day and state of the world through other forms of media. Yeah.
I think that one of the reasons that I would stray away from nonfiction is because like this feeling of like, how do you move forward is kind of the question that continues to circle in my mind is like, we don't it felt like at the beginning of this, like, oh, there's going to be a season, we're going to get through it, and then we're going to move on. We'll know what's coming next, right? And now it feels like we're in this stasis. And so for me, I think it would be really hard for me to dive into something nonfiction, even if it was like totally divorced from anything, right? Just because it would feel like, well, am I doing the right thing and moving forward in this direction, or should I be moving forward in this direction? It's a lot of, figuring out what comes next feels very hard right now. So, which I think is a little bit where that, like we joked at the beginning, the Corona depression, but I think that's what it is. It's like this feeling of stuck. Like, if I move this way now, 6 months from now, what is that going to do to, my family or my situation? If I don't move, like, is it better not to move, or is it better to continue? So there's a lot of that kind of indecision right now. And I think like, looking forward at the next 6, 8, 10 months / years, depending on how this plays out, as Robert said off air earlier. But it was like, it's what comes next that is interesting. It's interesting to kind of be processing that right now, and like how that affects my future plans, whether it should affect my future plans, as a writer, as an artist,
Yes. Yeah. Every choice we make right now, we're sort of making stabs in the dark because we don't know what the world will look like in 6 months or a year, or 2 or 5. And as artists, thinking about sort of what I'm writing now is historical fiction, and I felt like I knew its place in the world and its relevance to today's readers before. And now it's like, well, wow, where the world is at is going to look so different. So the relevance of that story might be change, different. Yeah. And maybe it won't change that much, but it feels very uncertain. And, it's not changing my engagement with the story or the way I'm writing it, but
it may change the way that readers engage with it because they may be in a different spot. Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and the conversations around it,
Yeah, for me, it's made me feel more clear about the fact that what we're doing is fake. You're writing stuff that's not true, and yet with things that you would never have guessed to be true happening in our world, that's where it feels odd. And I suppose if you look at, well, it would have been nice to be isolated for 3 months and I'll get the great novel written. But I think what we've all said, and you certainly both articulate very clearly, is there are so many new inputs requiring decisions we've never had to make before that inescapable because life has to continue, that's making our creative brain confused perhaps. So that's a different type of isolation. This is a stressful isolation where we're making decisions we've never been confronted by before, as opposed to a sabbatical 3 months where I'm going to extract myself from the world, be in a cabin somewhere and create. That's not what's happening now.
No.
And no matter how much you take yourself away from the news, it's and I do think that's not a bad thing. You definitely, I think a creative mind will suffer if we just spend all day on Facebook or on the news. It's just it's horrible. It's Unless you want to write angry fiction, in which case it's brilliant. Do it.
Maybe we should all turn to angry fiction. That could be a writing prompt for this week. Okay, everybody, angry fiction.
That's right.
Go. Angry,
Just imagine your Hunter S. Thompson. He's alive and he's
pounding the keyboard.
That's it.
Yes. Oh, goodness.
Well, that's true. I mean, who knows what next mind-blowing story is going to be written by some writer already typing the end as we know it, and it'll be another blockbuster that has come out of this.
Well, I'm depressed. I think on that note, let's just so.
If there's anything I think that's kept me hopeful is because it is very easy to get driven into a pit of despair. There's a wonderful book called, I think it's called The Rational Optimist, nonfiction, and it's a rebuttal of doomsayers. Everybody, the end of humanity has been predicted so many times. We're going to have a third world war. We're going to have climate change that's going to kill us all. We're going to have pandemics that's going to wipe us all out. We're going to an asteroid's going to hit, and all these things. The asteroid maybe is something we can't plan for, but it's interesting. He looks at some of the major things in history that you would have thought would have just wiped us out. And the human race has an extraordinary capacity to survive.
Right.
And even when it seems as if we can't possibly work together, somehow we manage it. Despite the irritation, annoyance, and downright obscenities that leadership show, somehow the human race adapts, moves on, and survives. And because I used to be quite cynical, skeptical, and even at times very depressed that we were heading down a world that was filled with greed and ugly war and just things that you think, we're so civilized. Why do we have this?
Right.
And there's one thing that the pandemic has proved is that collectively, for the most part, people can act together to prevent this sort of thing. So no matter what you think about how individual countries have handled it, for the most part, populations just okay, hunker down, wear a mask if I go out, do this, do that. It's going to be contained for the most part. And so we can very easily get distracted by the periphery, the extremists, and the sensationalism that's reported on the news.
Yep.
But in the book, The Rational Optimist, as he says, pretty much we're good at solving problems. That's what we're built for. That's what we evolved for. So, okay, when you look at it that way, it's just another problem to solve.
Right. I have a friend who says, and she got it somewhere, I don't know where, but manage your energy, not your time, and so as you were talking, Robert, and I was thinking about what you're saying in this resiliency of humanity, I was thinking, ultimately, I'm very optimistic that this is a time of tremendous change for humanity, for civilization, and that a lot of good is going to come out of the lessons we learn. But when I'm not managing my energy, when I'm not controlling what I take in, or I let myself take in too much, or I see something or hear something, or I'm living in the midst of something, it can really take me to the dark side. Right. And then that does affect creativity. But I think for me to keep writing is a huge part of normalcy in my life and a huge part of honoring what matters to me in my life, which is being creative, which is working on my stories consistently, if not greatly, every day. And
it's that handling the next thing that's in front of you, just handle the next thing and handle the next thing, and pretty soon, before you know it, you've handled them all. So,
and keep writing.
Keep writing.
Cue Dory the fish and Finding
That's
Nemo.
right.
Just keep swimming, but just keep writing.
What do? You write.
There you go. Yep. Send us out, Kathryn. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.